Good afternoon, friends. Today, Washington finds itself in confusion. Donald Trump's close associate, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, according to media reports, misunderstood the words of Vladimir Putin about ending hostilities in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is considering whether to invite President Zelensky to a summit in Alaska. What does this mean for Russia and our national security? Stay with us. This will get heated. Let's break this down in detail, because what happened behind closed doors in Moscow this week could shape the balance of power for years. When Steve Witkoff sat across from Vladimir Putin, he was expected to return to Washington with a clear understanding of Russia's demands for ending the Ukraine conflict. Instead, according to multiple insiders, he came back with a version of events so twisted that even American analysts are scratching their heads. His interpretation that Russia was prepared to consider a peaceful withdrawal from certain territories. But here's the truth. That phrase, used by Putin, was aimed squarely at Ukraine, not Russia. It was a demand for Kiev to pull back its forces from areas Moscow still considers contested. The misunderstanding is more than a translation error. It is a reflection of how badly the West still misreads Russian diplomacy. For us, there is no ambiguity. Russia has been clear from the start. Security guarantees, respect for our sovereignty, and the full withdrawal of hostile forces from territories that historically and legally belong under Russian protection. But the moment these terms reached Washington ears, they were reframed into something that made Russia appear ready to concede. That narrative, though false, is now being echoed in parts of the American press. This is not just sloppy reporting, it is strategic. The U.S. wants to convince its own public that Russia is under pressure, that our position is weakening, yet every serious observer in Moscow knows the opposite is true. And here comes the real twist. Instead of using the envoy's return to solidify a realistic U.S. strategy, Donald Trump is now pushing ahead with a personal meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska on August 15. Alaska is no random choice. This is a place with deep historical resonance, territory once part of Russia, sold in the 19th century, now set to host one of the most high-stakes diplomatic encounters in decades. For the Kremlin, the symbolism is unmistakable. An American president willing to meet Russia halfway, both literally and figuratively, on soil that once flew the Russian flag. This meeting will be the first between Trump and Putin since 2019, and the first U.S. hosted platform for such talks since the Cold War. That alone is enough to make European leaders nervous. Their fear is simple, that Trump will prioritize direct U.S. Russia dialogue over NATO's collective line, potentially sidelining Brussels and undermining the narrative of Western unity. In private, some EU officials are already voicing alarm that Washington is drifting toward a bilateral deal with Moscow, one in which Ukraine's leadership will be presented with hard choices they can no longer delay. The White House, perhaps sensing this unease, is now floating the idea of inviting Zelensky to the Alaska summit. Officially, the reasoning is to ensure balanced dialogue. Unofficially, it is a move to reassure NATO allies that Ukraine's voice won't be drowned out. But think about what this means in practice. If Zelensky shows up in Alaska, he will walk into a room where the United States is desperate for a deal. Russia holds the stronger strategic hand, and Europe is clinging to its influence like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. Such a scenario will not empower Ukraine. It will expose the fragility of their position. From Moscow's perspective, this is not a negotiation in the traditional sense. It is a test of endurance, clarity, and resolve. Russia has nothing to gain from rushing into agreements that do not address the root causes of this conflict. We have already shown our resilience against sanctions, our ability to maintain stability at home, and our capacity to project strength abroad. The Alaska summit is simply another stage, a theater where Washington's internal divisions, Europe's insecurities, and Kiev's dependency will all be on full display. It's worth noting how carefully the Kremlin has handled the lead up to this meeting. No grand announcements, no last-minute concessions, no sign of desperation. Instead, a steady, measured approach that communicates confidence. This is in stark contrast to the West, where leaks, conflicting statements, and frantic speculation dominate the headlines. That imbalance in tone is not accidental. It's a strategic advantage. The more the West talks, the more it reveals its own disunity. For the Russian audience, the lesson here is straightforward. Patience wins wars of position. The United States is entering this summit with competing priorities. Trump's desire to secure a historic deal before the election, the Pentagon's insistence on sustaining pressure on Russia, and the State Department's fear of alienating European allies. These priorities cannot all be met, which means compromises will have to be made. And in high-stakes diplomacy, the side that is more united internally usually gets the better deal. Some may wonder, what if Trump uses Alaska to push for immediate de-escalation, even if it means asking Russia for symbolic gestures? The answer lies in how Moscow frames its stance. There is no need to reject dialogue outright. Rather, we reaffirm that any path to peace must begin with the removal of hostile forces from Russia, claimed territory, the lifting of punitive sanctions, and a formal recognition of our security demands. These are not maximalist fantasies. They are the foundations for stability in Eastern Europe. Without them, any so-called peace will be as fragile as glass. In the days leading up to August 15, expect the information war to intensify. Western media will publish stories hinting at secret Russian concessions. Ukrainian outlets will attempt to paint Alaska as a trap for Moscow. Some in Europe will call for last-minute unity summits to coordinate positions. All of this is noise. The truth is that Russia enters these talks from a position of strength, backed by strategic patience and a clear sense of purpose. Our economy remains functional despite sanctions. Our armed forces have adapted to the realities of modern warfare, and our diplomacy continues to attract attention beyond the Western Bloc. The Alaska summit, it will not be the end of the Ukraine conflict, but it will be a marker in history, a moment when the United States, for all its rhetoric, was forced to sit across from a Russian leader it cannot isolate, cannot ignore, and cannot defeat on the battlefield of ideas. Whatever the outcome, Moscow's message to the world remains the same. Russia negotiates from a position of dignity, not weakness. For our viewers, the takeaway is clear. Do not be swayed by headlines designed to make you believe Russia is bending under pressure. The reality, as even some Western insiders admit in private, is that their side is running out of options. They are juggling too many objectives, each pulling them in a different direction. Russia, by contrast, stays the course, because we know exactly what we want, and we have the means to achieve it. As we watch the developments in Alaska, remember that diplomacy is not about who speaks the loudest, but about who speaks with conviction and consistency. On that front, Russia has no equal in this contest. The coming days will test the patience of all parties, but patience is a resource we have in abundance. The West's misunderstanding of our demands is not a setback. It is a reminder that our clarity of vision stands in sharp contrast to their fog of confusion. So stay tuned, friends. The Alaska meeting may take place far from Moscow, but the weight of Russian resolve will be felt in every word, every handshake, every subtle gesture across that table. This is not just about territory. It is about respect, security, and the rightful place of Russia in the global order. And on those matters, there will be no compromise.